Okay, so guys, let's begin. Let us continue further with the next concept of polymorphism, okay, which is overloading. Yesterday, we saw what you mean by overriding, and we understood from different perspective how overriding can be performed. Fine. Next, we are going to look at overloading concept. What is overloading? So we have already covered this in my earlier lecture, constructor overloading, correct? So let's see what basically we get to know from chat GPT, right? Anyways, we will go in our way, but just for your understanding, method overloading in Java. Okay, in what? Java. Let's do this here. So you notice now method overloading in Java is a feature that allows to have multiple methods with same name but different parameters. It's one of the way Java supports polymorphism, which means I can develop multiple methods in the same class, but these methods will have different number of arguments and different type of arguments. Fine. Now, these methods are differentiated based on the number or type of parameters they accept. Overloading allows you to perform similar operations with the methods that have same name but handle different data types or different number of inputs. Example, let's take this here. Now, I will create here, okay? So let me define what is method overloading. Let's firstly define that here. Method overloading. Method overloading. What is method overloading? Here we create more than one method in same class with same method name, provided they have different 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 number of arguments or different different type of arguments. Different type of arguments. Fine. Here we create more than one method in same class with same method name, provided they have different number of arguments or different types of arguments. I've already covered this in constructor overloading, so definition should be clear. But let's see some simple usages. Okay. So create I'm going to create here one class called as calculator. Let's create here a class. Let me create here a Java class called as calculator. Fine. Now this calculator class is supposed to perform addition, okay, of integer values, addition of decimal values. Fine. How will you do this now? So I'm going to build a method public, and this will return int add. Let's make it void for now. Void add numbers. And I'm going to give in this two parameters in order to add two numbers, int x comma int y. And then let's create a variable result where I will add x plus y. And then let's print here result. Let's print here result. Now I will build another method with the same name, but I will change this to double, or for now, let me go with float, right? I will change this to float, and this result will also become now float. Observe here what is happening with method overloading. I'm able to create multiple methods with same name, but the functionality in that method is different. Fine. Here the functionality is to add integer values. Here the functionality is to add decimal values. But then why is it called as polymorphism? Because again, the same feature is taking multiple form. add numbers is taking multiple forms. Add numbers is able to add integer values. Add numbers is able to add decimal value. When you develop a method such that it can take more than one form, depending on the situation, it becomes polymorphism. So this is also polymorphism. But this is called as compile time polymorphism. Sir, why is it called as compile time polymorphism? Because this polymorphism will occur during the compilation of your program. When the .java file is converted to .class file, you will see that method overloading is taking place. So let me create an object of calculator. C is equal to new calculator, and let's type C dot add numbers 10.3f, and let me add here 10.4f. Fine. Now you see that the first add method is adding decimal value. The second add method is adding integer value, right? But is that now here the add numbers method is taking multiple forms? Yes or no? So that's again polymorphism. So please write down this definition. It's a small concept since we have already talked about this in constructor overloading. This concept you should be able to understand quickly. Please write this example quickly. Make a note of it. Yes, I'm little held up. I will not be available. So I've just changed the date to 5th March, the new batch. Instead of 18th Feb, I'll be keeping it on March 5th. Okay? Some 3 days I might not be there in this month. Okay. Now let us continue further. The next concept which we are going to learn is very, very important concept and a very big concept. Exceptions and exception handling in Java. But before I do that, let's understand few important things. There are some miscellaneous concept I'll have to cover before I start with this. What is that? The first miscellaneous concept is this: static members are not inherited in Java, right? So what do you mean by that? Observe here. Now let's say I have class A. Fine, I'll rename this file. Now I have a method public, public, static, void and test. Let's try to print here 100. Now right click on this, go to class B, and let's do inheritance. Now when we do inheritance, a bit of confusion will arise here. Now when I'm writing extends A, okay, and then when I write B dot test, you will now claim that this test method, which is static, is inherited to B. That's why with class B, I'm able to access this. And you'll get the output as 100. But actually, this is not the thing that is happening. Now, what is happening is static members are not inherited. But when you write b.test, what your Java compiler will do, it will convert that to a.test. Fine. So whatever b.test you have written down, that statement will automatically get converted to capital A.test, and it will end up calling the test method. Fine. There is no concept of inheritance that we can apply on static. Now, one more way to understand this is, if static methods are inherited, then we should be able to override that method. Because overriding cannot happen without inheritance. So if I now try to override this method, okay, I'll apply at the rate override annotation. Why am I getting an error? Right? So we get here the method type must be override or implement super type. Why overriding is not happening? Because if inheritance does not happen, overriding cannot happen. For overriding, the bare minimum rule here is inheritance. Is this clear, everyone, now? Right? Without inheritance, overriding cannot be achieved. Static members are not inherited. Overriding of static members is not possible. Is this point clear? Everyone, did you understand? Firstly, write this. Okay? Write this particular example. Then I'll give you some notes on this. Make a note of it quickly. Guys, we are going to freeze the batch right soon. And we are going to move you all to the Pankaj Sir Academy app. Fine. So students, install the Pankaj Sir Academy app. From the backend, people will be added to the batch soon. Okay. Done. Please write this note as well. Done. Everyone clear with this? Okay. Now the next thing, right? Let's observe here. Okay. Now I'll try to override a static method. I'm getting an error. Can you tell me why am I getting an error? Did you understand? Everyone? Yeah? Keep this in mind. Please write this down. Is it done? Okay. Now, let's continue further. Now we are going to look at the concept of exception handling. Fine, which means whenever I'm talking about OOPS concept, object oriented programming concept, they're applicable on non static members. Keep this in mind. It is not applicable on static members. Okay, so inheritance applicable on non static, polymorphism applicable on non static as of now. Okay, now we are going to look at exceptions and exception handling in Java. What do you mean by that? Let's try to understand this. Firstly, what do you mean by exception? In layman terms, exceptions means unexpected events. For example, let's say you're taking the class and all of a sudden that projector falls on his head. Fine. Now he never expected that. It was an unexpected event in his life. He never thought that this is going to happen. He was taking classes, all of a sudden projector fell, right? This is an unexpected event in my life. Any such unexpected events that makes me to stop from further executing is called as exception. Fine. Accidents are exceptions, correct? Death is also an exception. You cannot predict that, right? So exceptions are unexpected events in life. It is like that. But when an exception occurs, the execution has to stop. Example, let's say I'm using an Excel file. I'm entering some data in it. All of a sudden, Excel file, now I notice the Excel file stops responding. I'm not able to type anything in the Excel file. Why? Because an exception occurred. And what happened because of the exception occurred? Because of the exception occurred, Excel file is now not executing further. Further, I'm not able to interact with it. Or you're using some mobile phone app. In your mobile phone, you're using some app. You open the app. After some time, the mobile phone app hangs, which means there is an exception that has occurred. Because of the exception, your mobile phone hangs. Correct? Exceptions will make your software from not getting executed further. Fine. And we never want this to happen. Correct? Whenever an exception occurs, for example, you go to an ATM machine, you're depositing cash, all of a sudden power goes off. The cash counting just started, power goes off. When the power is back, the money that you entered in the cash deposit machine should return back to the user, right? But it is not doing, or it would continue its operation from where it had stopped. But what happened? Power gone, ATM machine, the cash deposit machine, it is counting the cash, it stops all of a sudden. Neither it is depositing the cash, neither it is returning the money back to you. What did exception do here now? Exception has caused the program to stop from executing. Fine. That's where exception handling comes in picture. Now, what is the job of exception handling? The job of exception handling is when such exception occurs, let's handle that. Example of that cash deposit machine, when you are entering the cash, okay, it started counting, power goes off. When the power comes back, it should handle that exception and continue its work from where it had stopped further. When an exception happened, let's keep that money in a separate compartment and then again count from there and deposit it into the account which the user wanted to. Fine. Okay. Or it can at least deposit the money into that compartment and display one message to the user that please contact the branch. They will open the cash deposit machine and they will return back the cash to you. At least some way of handling it. Let's say you are in a lift, all of a sudden power goes off. The lift has to stop. If the lift doesn't stop, then you will become one photo frame with one garland on that photo and two agarbattis in front of it. Yes or no? Which means when an exception occurs, when the lift power goes off, automatically the lift has to stop. And when the power comes back, the lift has to go all the way to the ground floor and open the doors for the, all the people who are there in the lift, all the people who are there in the lift, they should be safely be able to come out. It should not get stuck there only. When the power comes back, the lift is not moving at all further now. So that means the exception is not handled. Same way in the programs as well. There are several scenarios where exception might occur. And when an exception occurs, we should handle that exception. Right? Example, see this here. As we had some code which we were writing it for some batch, but I'll just show you some exceptions here now for your understanding. Example. Now, let's assume that now I'm going ahead and giving the username and password wrong for the database. So I have some database code here, a very simple code written down. And here the password to log into my database is test, but I'll make it testing. Fine, I'll make it testing, which means I'm giving a bad user input. I'm giving a bad user input in my program. The password here is test, but I made the password as testing. Now, if I right click and do run on server, observe here, when I right click and do run on server, this application would get started. But now, because the password is wrong, I will not be able to save the data via this form. Right? If I try to do that, the application throws, right? The application should throw an exception. What do you see here? What is it? Why did I get this exception? This exception occurred because of a bad user input. Correct? Now, we need to handle this exception and return back an appropriate message back telling that, look, your password is incorrect, username is incorrect. And that's where this exception I'm throwing. Correct? So there are many instances where exception might occur. Example, I'm using here some code in order to upload our images into some cloud storage. Fine. There are a lot of files, image files in my project. And now to store these image files in my project, I'm using one of the service in AWS called as S3. S3 service is like Google Drive. In short, in layman terms, as of now, since we have not discussed about S3 and all, we'll discuss later. But S3 is like Google Drive. So what happens here now? Whatever images, let's say I've got lakhs of photos. I'm building one hotel management system like Make My Trip, or it can be Airbnb, which has lakhs and lakhs of photos. Where will you store this lakhs and lakhs of photos? These lakhs and lakhs of photos, I'm going to store that in some cloud storage like S3, or it can be any other cloud storage. But now I'm unable to connect to that cloud storage for some reason. Fine. So let's see this here. I have that project here. I'm just going to start that project and let's see whether am I able to upload the required details or not. So I'm going to now start my project and we should be able to see one more exception here now. Okay, because I have deleted some of the services yesterday after teaching that in one of the batch. So it will not accept the photos now. Fine. So there will be some sort of exception that is going to get triggered, right? Let's see what is that exception. So I'm going to now upload the photo. You see that here? I'm uploading a photo through some tool, right? There is a photo here. There is a photo here. You see that? I'm uploading some photo. Okay, some photo, I'm uploading it. But when I try to upload, see, what do I get here? Exception. Fine. What do I get here? I get here an exception. Fine. See, I get here what? Some exception. Okay. I'm not able to basically, so this is some other exception now that has occurred here. There is some other exception, but these are all the exceptions that you will start seeing in your project. Now, when these exceptions are occurring, if you look at the root cause for these exceptions, is we are giving some bad user input. Either I'm giving the bad user input, or in the program, somewhere some wrong data is being used. Because of that, my application is crashing. Did you understand the meaning now? So, when does an exception occur? Firstly, let's understand exceptions. So, when a bad user input is given, we get we get exceptions in our program. Next, if exception occurs, if exception occurs and if not handled, then the program execution will stop. Right? This is the problem with exception now. You notice that I did not handle the exception. What happened now? It just throws the exception and no further code after that it is running. If this was handled, at least it would return back an appropriate message to me. Look, this is the problem. Look, this is the issue. Correct? I'm entering a wrong data. Look, this is a wrong data you have entered in the form. Enter the right data. That's why I'm throwing an exception. Correct? Let's say I'm developing a sign up form. I entered an email ID. I registered. Next day again, I'm trying to register with the same email ID. You cannot do sign up with the same email ID twice. Second time when I do a sign up, I just don't want to throw an exception and stop the program. Rather, I can give there a meaningful message that look, our duplicate email ID, okay, is being used to register. Please use a different email ID. Or this email ID already exists. Okay, hence cannot sign up. At least giving such messages is meaningful, right? Or you just simply crash and don't give any messages at all to the user. How does it feel? Right? That's not a right way of basically developing our program. Whenever an exception occurs, we have to handle that and give an appropriate response. So that now the user, based on the response, will take the further steps what needs to be done. Right? Okay? I hope this is clear. Now here I got a message that some data truncation. See, now I can understand this. Since we are developers, I can understand what is the problem. But will the URL, whether the user will understand this? Will he understand such messages? I understood that there is some data that is too long, and that data I cannot store that in the database table. That data is too long, I cannot store that data in the database. Okay, there is some issue there. But now to the user, shall I give this message? Imagine the user is entering 11-digit number and I will give him data truncation exception. What you will understand? Or should I tell him invalid mobile number? Mobile number should be 10 digit. That's an appropriate message, or should I tell him data truncation? Huh? Right? So if you do not handle an exception, then how will you return back a appropriate response? Fine? Okay? So please write this down firstly. Make a note of this. Minimum 15-20 interview questions will come from this topic. 15 to 20 interview questions will come from this topic, and it's a very, very big. Done. Everyone. So when do we get a exception? Now, what is the difference between an exception and error? What is the difference? Huh? You're doing some syntax mistakes, right? Semicolon is missing, system, S capital, S written in lowercase. So your compiler is checking for error. But errors also comes under the category of exception only, which we will talk about that further. Fine. When we see the diagram, you will understand that in a better way, that errors is basically error is one of the class that is extending exception class. But I'll come to that concept bit later. Now, let's look at the next part. Now, let's continue here. And for explaining you things in the class, I'm purposefully going to cause one exception. Exceptions are something, right, which is happening because of some bad user input, and we never want that to happen. But in this case, I'm going to now purposefully cause one exception. Int x, int y is equal to 0. I will divide z is equal to x divided by y. I will now print further welcome. Now, tell me one thing. Can I divide a number by 0? Yes. Sure. Are you sure about it? हाँ? आंसर नहीं पता है मतलब आप लोगों को देख के ये लग रहा है, इसीलिए एप्टीट्यूड टेस्ट नहीं होना चाहिए. राइट? कैन आई डिवाइड अ नंबर बाय जीरो? व्हाट हैपेंस इफ आई डिवाइड अ नंबर बाय जीरो? हाँ? इनफाइनाइट. Infinite, undefined. What is undefined? Cannot calculate. What is 10 divided by 2? What is the meaning of that? I'm dividing 10 chocolates, 5 to 2 people. Can I divide 10 chocolates to 0 people? Then it's an invalid mathematical operation. Correct? Whenever you're dividing a number by 0, it's an invalid mathematical operation. You cannot divide a number by 0. I'm giving a bad user input at line number 7. I'm giving a bad user input, and because of that, I see here one exception. What do I see here? I see here an exception. Hold on. Let me just stop Tomcat, which is in use here. Right click somewhere in use. Hold on 1 minute. Right click, run as, okay. Sorry. This is a test method. I'll have to change that to main method because test method will not run on its own. Correct. That is also an exception. What you saw now. Right? That is also an exception. What you saw now, that made my program to basically what? That made Eclipse to crash. Okay. What is this now? Division by what? At which line is it stopping? So when it stops at line 7, is it going to line 8 and printing welcome? What is exception doing? It is halting a program at a particular line. And because of that, the further line of codes will not execute. Okay. So the program stops here. Please write this quickly. Please make a note of this quickly. Is this clear? Now the question arises, sir, exception is occurring. But how do I handle this exception now? So what they did in Java is, in order to handle exception, if you want to handle what? Exception in Java. If you want to handle exception in Java, Java provides us a try, a catch block. Fine, a try and a catch block. Fine, what does it provides us? A try and a catch block. Now let's say in the try block, I have these lines of code. Some lines of code is present in what? The try block. Okay, so these are the lines of code that we have it in try block. So line 1, line 2, 3, line 3, and then we have another line of code here. Fine. Now let's assume that exception is occurring at line number 3. This is the place where we notice exception occurs. Now what a try block does, listen carefully. The job of the try block is, if any line of code in try block throws an exception, if any line of code in try block throws an exception, then the try block will create one exception object. Who is creating an exception object? Try block. When is it creating exception object? When an exception occurs, any line of code in try block throws an exception, try block will create one exception object. And that exception object's address, it will give it to catch block. But since it is exception object's address, in the catch block, I'm going to use here is a reference variable of exception class. Because object's addresses are stored in reference variable. So what will I write here now? I will now use here one of the exception class to begin with is exception, and E here is a reference variable. Correct? Reference variable data type is what? Class name. Is the data type of E class name? Yes. So now see this here. This particular object's address, I'm going to store it in E, which means the catch block using this E knows where this object is, which is causing exception. This catch block will now suppress this particular exception. And once the exception is suppressed, the further code that you write after catch block will continue to run. This line will not run. This line will not run. Are you understanding? When exception occurs, this line, from this line, object is created by try block, object given to catch block will handle exception, and after catch block, whatever code that you write will continue to run. Did you understand now? Our next concept will be learning exception classes in depth manner. But now, let's try this here. So I'll just use this code inside a try catch block. Just type try, control space bar, and it will be auto completed. Fine. Now here I will print e dot get message. E dot get message. For now, I'll simply get the message where the exception has, what exception has occurred. So exception occurs here at line 8. If I write anything at line 9, that will not run. When exception occurs at line 8, this will create one exception object, object's address given, e dot get message, will go to that object, exception message it will get, which we are printing. Catch block will handle that exception, print the exception message. Once catch block handles the exception, further it will print welcome. Is it printing welcome? Was it printing welcome earlier? Is it printing 100? No. So tell me, what is your try catch block doing? Try block, if any exception occurs in the try block creates an exception object, and the address of that it will give it to catch block. What catch block does? Catch block suppresses the exception. After the exception is suppressed, what will happen next? After the exception is suppressed, what will happen next? The code after the catch block will continue to run further. Is this clear, everyone? Yes? Any questions, queries? No? Okay. So firstly, write this diagram as it is in your notebook. I want you people to write this particular query. Okay. Please write down. If in a try block, yeah, it will not run because exception where it has occurred, from there it has to go to catch block. It cannot run because once the exception has occurred, it has to be handled. After handling, whatever the code comes further, that can run. Okay. Done. Clear? Okay. So let's make a note of that here. What is that? Okay. To handle exception in Java, we use we use try catch block. We use try catch block. Okay. Next, if any exception occurs in try block, then try block will create exception exception object, and that object address, it will give it to catch block. Catch block catch block will suppress the exception, and the further code will continue to run. Okay, if while typing in speedy way some letters have missed here, some typos are there, then you can make that correct. Is it done? Please write this program quickly, make a note of it, write this down. Okay, done. So we'll stop here. We'll continue again tomorrow. People missed any of the notes, look at the recorded class in YouTube. Try to write that down. Is this clear? Bye, guys.